This is an ancient scroll that was buried by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius 2,000 years ago. Scientists say it could reveal brand new philosophical writings.
This seems like a moonshot, reading a scroll from Herculaneum without opening it. There were so many things that I was told we would not be able to do. It's been very real that we might not achieve our goals.
For 2,000 years, a Roman scroll sat sealed inside volcanic rock, never opened, never touched. Its secrets locked away by one of history's most violent eruptions. Then artificial intelligence did what every scholar, every tool, and 3 centuries of human effort could not. It reached inside, and what it pulled out of that carbonized darkness left historians speechless. Not because the technology worked, because of the single word it found. A word that had no business being there. A word that suggests this scroll may contain something the modern world has never read before. An entirely unknown voice from the ancient world, speaking across 2,000 years of silence. What that word was, and what it might mean.
Herculaneum is sometimes referred to as the other Pompeii. In 79 AD, this ancient Roman city was also buried in volcanic ash by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius.
The library that Vesuvius swallowed August 24th, 79 AD. The residents of Herculaneum had no warning, not a real one. Herculaneum is sometimes referred to as the other Pompeii. In 79 AD, this ancient Roman city was also buried in volcanic ash by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. You've heard of Pompeii, but Herculaneum was something different. Pompeii was commerce, loud, crowded, transactional. Herculaneum was wealth at its most refined. Roman elites came here to think, to read, to own the kind of library that announced its owner occupied a different tier of civilization entirely. One of those owners had assembled something unlike anything else in the ancient world. Historians believe the Villa of the Papyri, a sprawling seaside estate now buried under the modern town of Herculaneum, belonged to Lucius Calpurnius Piso Caesoninus, Julius Caesar's own father-in-law. A man who collected not just wealth, but knowledge. His villa contained over 1,000 papyrus scrolls, philosophical texts, scientific treatises, works from thinkers whose names we still know and whose arguments we still debate 2 millennia later. And somewhere in that collection was a scroll that a man named James Bruce would one day read. The virtual unrolling of it has revealed substantial parts of the papyrus, including several columns of text. One of the first words deciphered being the ancient Greek word for disgust, without ever knowing, until the moment he saw it, that he was the first person in 2,000 years to do so. When Vesuvius erupted, a pyroclastic surge hit Herculaneum at temperatures estimated above 300 degrees Celsius. Walls of superheated gas and ash, moving at hundreds of kilometers per hour, killed every living thing in seconds. The scrolls didn't burn, they carbonized, fused into dense black cylinders that looked to any untrained eye exactly like lumps of charcoal. Dense, fragile, completely sealed. The words inside were still there, locked in darkness, physically intact. They would wait for over 1,600 years. In the 1750s, workers digging a well shaft punched straight through the roof of that buried villa and pulled out handfuls of what they initially thought was coal. Some early excavators didn't recognize what they were holding. Accounts from the period describe workers throwing scrolls into fires, tossing them aside as debris. Cardinal Camillo Paderni, who supervised early recovery efforts, reportedly dismissed hundreds of them as worthless black cylinders, authorizing their destruction before anyone understood what they were. So the Bodleian text we know is Greek. It looks like philosophy. It's almost certainly going to be a philosophical text. The odds are that it's an Epicurean text by Philodemus, getting new texts is great. Getting new texts from an author that I've worked on. The ones that survived were transferred to museums, where they sat silent and unreadable for the next 3 centuries. You could hold a Herculaneum scroll. You could see it, but the moment anyone tried to open one, it crumbled to dust.
What you're seeing behind me is the first ever set of text from inside a closed Herculaneum scroll. This is the first time that anyone has seen this text in 2,000 years.
For nearly 300 years, every scholar who approached the problem walked away defeated. Every tool, every technique, every attempt to see inside produced nothing but destruction and more silence. The scrolls had outlasted Rome itself, outlasted the medieval world, outlasted the Renaissance, outlasted the Enlightenment. And still, they wouldn't give up what was inside them. Nobody knew what those scrolls said. Nobody knew if they contained works already known to scholarship, or arguments that had vanished from human memory entirely. They were sealed, unknowable, and patient in a way that outlasted every civilization that tried to read them. If you want to be here when those seals finally break, when the next text comes out of the darkness, subscribe now and hit the bell. This story is still unfolding, and what's still buried dwarfs what's already been found. The man who kept going, Brent Seals, is a computer scientist at the University of Kentucky. He does not look like a man who spent 2 decades fighting an invisible wall. What you're seeing behind me is the first ever set of texts.
Among these ruins, archaeologists found in the 18th century the villa of the father-in-law of Julius Caesar. In it, they found a library with at least 1,800 ancient scrolls with texts in Greek and Latin.
This is the first time that anyone has seen this text in 2,000 years. Methodical, precise. The kind of person who chooses every word carefully, which, given what he does, is exactly the right way to be built. He started working on the Herculaneum problem in the early 2000s with a technique he called virtual unwrapping. Instead of physically opening a fragile scroll, you would use high-resolution 3D scanning to map the entire interior structure, every layer, every crease, every fold of carbonized papyrus captured digitally. Then you would computationally peel those layers apart on a screen, reading the text without ever touching the physical object. It worked structurally, brilliantly. The 3D models were extraordinary, even beautiful. Seals and his team could see the layers of papyrus wound tight inside the carbonized shell. The architecture of the scroll was visible in breathtaking detail, but the ink was invisible. Ancient Roman scribes wrote using carbon-based ink applied to papyrus that had since carbonized. Carbon on carbon, black on black. When the scans came back, there was no contrast, no readable signal. The letters that had to be there, that were definitely there, preserved inside the scroll for 2,000 years, simply could not be distinguished from the surrounding material. Everything looked the same shade of dark.
A Greek philosopher that we believe was Philodemus of Gadara sat in one of the many rooms of the Villa de Papyri.
Seals was told repeatedly by colleagues, institutions, and funding bodies that the problem was physically unsolvable, that the contrast wasn't there to find. Among these ruins, archaeologists found in the 18th century the villa of the father-in-law of Julius Caesar. In it, they found a library with at least 1,800 ancient scrolls with texts in Greek and Latin. That no technology, current or future, could pull a readable signal from that kind of noise. He kept going anyway, for 20 years. The breakthrough, when it finally came, wouldn't arrive through a slow institutional process or a government-funded research program. It would arrive through open competition, a 21-year-old working from a home office, and an AI that learned to see something the human eye never could. The Vesuvius Challenge. In March of 2023, Brent Seals, alongside Silicon Valley investors Nat Friedman and Daniel Gross, launched the Vesuvius Challenge, a global open competition with $1 million in prize money for anyone on Earth who could successfully read text from inside a sealed Herculaneum scroll. It was an audacious idea. It was also, by conventional academic standards, completely unorthodox. And that unorthodoxy turned out to be exactly what the problem needed. They provided the data. Ultra-high-resolution CT scans of 2 complete scrolls, performed using a particle accelerator at the Diamond Light Source facility in the United Kingdom. The scans produced images at a resolution of just 7.91 micrometers per voxel, fine enough to see individual papyrus fibers. They posted everything online, every CT scan, every processing script, every model developed over the previous 2 decades. No gatekeeping, no academic credentials required.
The last time a human looked at this was in ancient Roman.
But you're saying there's a word there.
The word porphyra or porphyras starts to become very clear, and that's a word for purple.
No institutional affiliation necessary. Traditional academic channels would have insisted on controlled access, peer review, careful attribution. Seals and Friedman blew all of that up deliberately. A Greek philosopher that we believe was Philodemus of Gadara sat in one of the many rooms of the Villa dei Papyri. The institutional response was skeptical. Every other response was not. Within weeks, a global community had descended on the dataset. Machine learning engineers and classicists, computer vision researchers and amateur coders, teams from dozens of countries working in parallel, sharing breakthroughs in real time at a pace no single institution could have matched. They argued in forums, ran training sessions on GPU clusters through the night, posted results, and invited criticism from strangers. The collaboration was chaotic, competitive, and extraordinarily fast. Then, on October 12, 2023, a 21-year-old computer science student named Luke Ferreter submitted something that made the project's lead researchers go silent. Picture the moment. Ferreter is at his desk, home office, consumer-grade hardware, nothing institutional about the setup. He has been training a neural network on the CT scan data, iterating through approaches that mostly don't work, running model after model through the night. Then the output loads on his screen, and there, rendered in ghostly gray against charcoal darkness, are letters. Greek letters. Sequential, clear, readable. He stared. He checked. He ran it again. He was 21 years old. He was working from a home office. He had no institutional backing, no peer review committee, no senior scholar looking over his shoulder. And he had just done something that 20 years of professional academic effort, millions in research funding, and the collective expertise of some of the world's leading classical scholars had failed to do. I was incredibly excited, Ferreter said afterward. I didn't expect it to work this well. It was a fragment, about 4 square centimeters of virtual papyrus surface, small enough to hold in your palm. And on it, the first text ever read from inside a sealed Herculaneum scroll. For the first time in 2,000 years, the wall had broken. The word that stunned a field. This is where James Bruce comes back into the story. Bruce had seen a lot of ancient text in his career as a papyrologist, someone who spends their professional life studying documents written on papyrus. The last time a human looked at this was an ancient Roman. But you're saying there's a word there. The word porphyra, or porphyras, starts to become very clear, and that's a word for purple. He had learned to read damaged, faded, fragmentary Greek and Latin the way most people read a newspaper. Burned documents. Rotted documents. Documents that had been partially destroyed by the people trying to preserve them. It was his job. He was exceptionally good at it. But when he sat down in front of the output from Ferreter's AI model, something was different. He leaned closer. He went quiet. He stared at the screen for a long time without saying anything. What the machine had extracted from inside sealed scroll PHERC Paris 4, never opened, never damaged, still physically intact after 2,000 years, was a Greek word that Bruce recognized immediately. A word that had no business appearing where it did. A word that, once he confirmed what he was seeing, made him understand that this wasn't just a technological milestone. This might be an entirely unknown text from the ancient world. The word was porphyras, purple. The word porphyrus starts to become very clear, Bruce explained afterward, still barely containing his excitement. And that's a word for purple. In the ancient Roman world, purple was not a color. It was a declaration of power with no modern equivalent. Tyrian purple, extracted from murex sea snails in a process so labor-intensive, it required thousands of snails to produce a single gram of dye, was the most expensive substance in the empire. A pound of purple-dyed wool cost the equivalent of 3 pounds of gold. Emperor Nero reportedly made it a capital offense for anyone outside the imperial family to wear it. "It's like driving around in your Ferrari," Bruce said. Except it's not a metaphor. It's a legal status marker. Roman emperors wore purple because the color itself announced imperial authority. Senators wore a purple stripe. Generals returning in triumph wore purple. The deeper the shade, the higher the rank. To wear purple without permission was not ostentatious. In certain periods, it was treason. And this word, this declaration, was sitting inside a scroll that had never been opened. When the researchers checked the new text against every previously published Herculaneum scroll, every fragment, every partial reading, every text recovered and cataloged over 3 centuries, it didn't match a single one. No known text in the entire collection contained this passage. They weren't reading a new portion of a known work. They were possibly reading something that no living person had ever encountered. A text sealed inside volcanic rock since the 1st century BC, representing a voice and an argument the modern world had simply never heard. The AI had decoded a Roman scroll sealed for 2,000 years, and James Bruce, a man who had built his career reading the unreadable, sat in silence in front of his screen, unable to immediately say why the word that came out of the darkness was the one word nobody expected. What the machine learned to see. Here's the part nobody prepared for. When the machine learning teams began working the open data set, they expected to confirm what previous researchers had concluded. No readable signal existed in the CT scans. The ink was indistinguishable from the papyrus, carbon on carbon. The problem was physical, not technological. The AI disagreed. What Ferreter, and then Youssef Nader and Julian Schilliger working in parallel, discovered was this. The ink and the surrounding papyrus hadn't carbonized in exactly the same way. When ancient scribes applied ink to papyrus, the ink sat on top of the fibers, creating a microscopic surface texture. Almost imperceptible, but physically real. When the scroll carbonized, that texture was preserved, frozen in place by the same event that sealed the words inside. The inked regions had developed a distinct crackle pattern. Fine, irregular fracture lines, subtly different from the fracture patterns on bare papyrus. The difference was invisible to the human eye. completely undetectable by researchers who had spent careers staring at these scans. The machine could see it. Consider what that means. Scholars with decades of expertise, people who had devoted their professional lives to exactly this problem, looked at these scans and concluded the signal was absent. Not weak, not difficult. Absent. The problem was physical. No better tool would change the outcome because there was nothing for any tool to detect. They were wrong. Luke Ferreter trained a neural network specifically to detect that crackle pattern across the curved, layered interior surface of a 2,000-year-old carbonized scroll. Nader and Schilliger developed competing approaches over the following weeks, each building on the other's publicly shared findings. 3 students, including a 21-year-old American, found the best solution. And this is the result. 15 columns of text in ancient Greek, seen for the first time in almost 2,000 years, collaborating and competing simultaneously, arguing about methodology, iterating faster than any academic peer review process could follow. The final breakthrough image showed not just isolated letters, but sequential text. Columns of Greek script stretching across a virtual surface that had been sealed for 2 millennia. Scroll PHERC.Paris.4 had never been opened, never physically touched. And this is where it gets genuinely strange. The AI didn't just find the signal everyone said wasn't there. It found it consistently, replicably, at scale, which meant this wasn't a lucky read on a single scroll. It was a method, a pipeline, something that could be run again and again on every sealed scroll still sitting in museum collections across Europe. And that changes the calculation entirely. The size of what's still buried. Stop and think about the scale of this for a moment. 2 complete scrolls were provided for the Vesuvius challenge. The winning teams decoded approximately 2,000 Greek characters, about 15 columns of text, representing roughly 5% of the readable content of a single scroll. 5%. From one scroll. There are at least 280 scrolls remaining in the Naples National Archaeological Museum alone, already cataloged, already physically accessible, each one potentially containing text that has never been read by any living person. But the experts missed something when the early numbers came out. The museum collection isn't the main story. The villa of the Papyri has been excavated to only a fraction of its total extent. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted in the early 2000s revealed additional rooms, possibly an entire upper story, still buried and completely untouched under 18 meters of volcanic material. The prevailing scholarly theory, based on the composition of what has been found so far, is that the villa's main library, which would have contained Latin works and a much broader range of subjects than the Epicurean Greek texts recovered to date, is still down there. And this is where it gets genuinely staggering. The ancient world produced an enormous body of literature, philosophy, and science. Most of it is gone, erased by time, fire, deliberate destruction, and 16 centuries of neglect. We know from ancient sources that Aristotle wrote hundreds of works. We have fewer than 30. Epicurus reportedly produced over 300 texts. We have 3 letters and some fragments. Entire schools of philosophical thought survive only as echoes, second-hand summaries, quotations cited by writers who disagreed with them and had every reason to distort what they said. Every text we have from the ancient world is a survivor. A text that got copied enough times, valued enough by the right people, to make it through the collapse of Rome, through the medieval period, through the burning of the great libraries. Every thinker we know by name is a thinker whose work happened to be considered worth preserving by someone making that decision centuries after the author died. Countless others vanished, not because their ideas were unworthy, but because the material those ideas were written on didn't survive. The Villa of the Papyri is almost unique in the archaeological record. This library wasn't destroyed. It was sealed. The words didn't disappear. They went underground, and somewhere beneath 18 meters of compacted volcanic rock, in rooms no human being has entered since 79 AD, a library from one of the most important intellectual estates in the Roman world may still be sitting exactly where it was left, intact, unread, and waiting. 20 years of being told no. There is a video of the moment Brent Seals sees the decoded text for the first time. He is sitting in front of a monitor in a quiet room. The image loads on the screen. He leans forward, and then he goes completely still. Not the stillness of someone processing information, the stillness of someone whose entire body has caught up with something his mind knew was possible, but had never let himself fully believe. He doesn't cheer. He doesn't speak. He just stares. After a long moment, he says quietly, "What I'm now seeing is actually the thing I've been looking for." For someone who spent 20 years being told that what he was attempting was physically impossible, that the ink contrast wasn't there, that the technology wouldn't work, that the scrolls couldn't be accessed, that no institution would fund it, that no one would cooperate, that the whole enterprise was a moonshot that would never land. Those 14 words carry a weight that no summary can capture. Now that I look back on it, after 20 years' worth of aggregation and accumulation of results, he told colleagues afterward, it actually is kind of astounding to realize that all those people who said we couldn't do all those things were wrong. They were wrong. What the Vesuvius challenge proved, beyond the single decoded passage, beyond the one breakthrough submission, was a methodology, a replicable, scalable pipeline, high-resolution CT scanning, AI-driven crackle pattern detection, virtual unwrapping, human classical scholars providing verification and interpretation. Seals built the infrastructure over 20 years. Farrater broke through the wall in a home office on a consumer GPU cluster. Bruce read what the machine found and understood immediately what it meant. That relay, Seals, Farrater, Bruce, is now a documented, published, freely available process. Any team anywhere in the world with access to high-resolution CT scan data and the willingness to run the models can attempt to read a sealed Herculaneum scroll. The question is no longer whether the sealed scrolls can be read. The AI methodology is already being refined, trained on new fragments, applied at increasing scale by teams across the world. The only question left, the one that keeps every classicist in this field awake, is what the scrolls actually say. What Purple might be saying, let's go back to that word. Porphyros, purple. The passage in which it appears is still being analyzed. The team has not yet published a definitive identification of the full text's authorship or subject matter. But the context is the kind of thing that keeps classical scholars awake. The Herculaneum collection was almost certainly assembled around the philosophical preferences of Philodemus of Gadara, an Epicurean philosopher who lived in the 1st century BC and served as intellectual in residence for the villa's wealthy owner. The scrolls previously opened and partially read deal almost exclusively with Epicurean themes. The nature of pleasure, the good life, the philosophical case for simplicity over ambition and status. An Epicurean scroll discussing purple. Think about what that tension contains. Epicurean philosophy had deeply specific things to say about luxury, status, and conspicuous wealth. Epicurus himself argued that the pleasure derived from extravagant displays was never worth the anxiety that came with pursuing and protecting them. His followers built entire philosophical systems around that gap. The distance between the appearance of happiness and its actual experience. A scroll from this collection, defined by Epicurean thought, discussing the ultimate Roman status symbol. The one color that literally announced your legal rank in the imperial hierarchy. It could be doing any number of extraordinary things. A critique of imperial power and an analysis of desire. A philosophical argument about appearance versus reality in a civilization where clothing was a legal declaration. A direct engagement with the politics of who gets to display what, and what that reveals about what a civilization actually values beneath its stated ideals. Or, and this is what makes Bruce's silence so significant, it could be something scholars have no existing category for. A voice never heard. A thinker whose name has been lost entirely. Making an argument the modern world has simply never encountered. Nobody knows yet. The analysis is active. The AI pipeline is still running, and new fragments are being processed every week. The crackle detection model that Fariter built, and that Nader and Schilliger refined in parallel, is now being applied to additional scrolls from the collection. Each pass producing new candidate text for scholars like Bruce to evaluate, cross-reference, and slowly begin to understand. The machine that learned to see the invisible in 2023 is not done seeing. James Bruce will sit down in front of another monitor, and there will be another word, and the silence in that room will happen again. The investigation is just beginning. The Vesuvius challenge is ongoing. New prize tiers have been announced for reading more of the scrolls. The ultimate goal is complete decipherment of at least one full ancient text. Fariter, Nader, Schilliger, and dozens of researchers from the original competition continue refining their models, pushing the resolution of what the AI can detect, applying the methodology to additional scroll fragments with increasing confidence. The machine is learning, getting better, getting faster every iteration. That's not a metaphor. The neural networks trained on the crackle pattern are being improved with each new batch of data, and researchers who couldn't find signal in these scans a decade ago are now extracting readable columns of Greek text from scrolls that have never been touched. Broader conversations are underway about access to the full collection at the Naples National Archaeological Museum, about funding additional high-resolution CT scans, about what a systematic program to work through every known scroll would actually require. Those conversations have a different character now than they did 2 years ago. Because 2 years ago, this was theoretical. Now it has been done. Now it is a pipeline. Now it scales. And beneath the ground in Herculaneum, in rooms that no human being has entered since 79 AD, the villa waits. Not the rooms already excavated, the ones beyond. The upper story revealed by radar but never touched. The main library that the Epicurean collection found so far suggests exists somewhere deeper in the structure, containing Latin texts and a range of subjects that would dwarf what's already been recovered. If you've made it this far, you already understand what's at stake. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because when the next text comes out of those scrolls, we'll be covering it the moment it breaks. And the answers are going to matter. The crackle pattern is still being read. The pipeline is still actively running. Somewhere in the dark, beneath Herculaneum, an argument written 2,000 years ago by a person whose name we may not yet know is waiting for the moment the machine finally finds its fracture lines. and James Bruce sits down in front of another screen, leans forward, and goes quiet. That moment is coming, and right now, nobody knows what it will say.